I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com.
Hormones are essential for every cell in your body, and yet endocrine disruptors are everywhere. What to do? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Your hormonal balance is influenced by your diet, your stress level, your genetics, your gut microbes, and the chemicals you're exposed to every single day. How can you restore your body's natural balance?
Do you know where your adrenal glands are located? Most people don't, and yet they produce essential hormones vital to our well-being.
What's the latest on hormone replacement therapy for menopausal symptoms? Are there alternatives to estrogen and progesterone?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, improving hormone intelligence.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, restaurants and workplaces like call centers have been implicated as locations where COVID-19 infections are spread. Big social events like weddings have also provided the opportunity for people to transmit the virus, even before they know they're ill. Scientists have paid much less attention to more informal gatherings that might have fewer people but closer contact. Now, a study used national health insurance data for most of 2020. They compared the rate of COVID infections in households with a birthday in the previous 2 weeks to those without such a celebratory event. There were 2.9 million households included in the study. When COVID-19 was common in the surrounding communities, households with birthdays were about 30% more likely to have an infection. Children's birthdays were closely associated with a higher infection risk. The investigators suggest that small social gatherings like kids' birthday parties are risky when COVID rates are high.
How does a high sugar and moderate fat diet affect inflammation? A new study in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology found that when mice are put on such a regimen to mimic a Western diet, they develop skin and joint inflammation. These changes are accompanied by alterations in the gut microbiome. Even a short time on a Western diet can result in dysbiosis. These unhealthy changes in the types of intestinal bacteria are associated with inflammatory compounds such as cytokines. Switching the animals to a diet low in sugar and high in vegetables and fruits reduced inflammation. The authors conclude that modifications toward a healthier dietary pattern should be considered in patients with psoriatic skin and/or joint disease.
Irritable bowel syndrome is common and challenging to treat. Symptoms include abdominal pain, cramping, bloating, flatulence, diarrhea, or constipation. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition investigated a low FODMAP diet. That stands for low fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. These carbohydrates that are fermented by intestinal bacteria are components of some healthful foods, such as wheat, rye, legumes, garlic, onions, milk, yogurt, figs, mangoes, or blackberries. A study in China recruited more than 100 people with IBS and asked them to follow either a traditional or a low FODMAP diet. Those who followed the low FODMAP diet for 3 weeks had fewer symptoms and fewer carb-fermenting bacteria.
A new study from the UK shows that those who drink coffee are helping their livers. Fatty liver may result from excess consumption of alcohol or sugar, and it contributes to chronic liver disease. Incidence of liver disease has been rising around the world, including in both the U.S. and the U.K. Now, analysis of data from nearly 500,000 volunteers in the UK Biobank reveals that coffee drinkers were 20% less likely to develop fatty liver or chronic liver disease than those who didn't drink coffee. The study lasted about 11 years. During that time, coffee drinkers were also 49% less likely to die of liver disease and 20% less likely to die of liver cancer. The benefits increased up to about 4 cups a day and included decaf and instant, as well as regular brewed coffee. An observational study like this can't establish cause and effect, but coffee drinkers can rejoice that their beverage appears to be beneficial.
As people age, inflammation of the stomach lining may reduce their ability to produce stomach acid. Researchers wondered if this condition, called atrophic gastritis, leads to reduced absorption of vitamin B12. They also considered the question of whether acid-suppressing drugs, such as omeprazole or esomeprazole, affect vitamin B12 levels. Either high-dose PPI use or atrophic gastritis are associated with suboptimal levels of vitamin B12. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Are your hormones in tune? There's a lot of confusion about hormones. These compounds go far beyond the sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone, although those are very important. Our bodies can't function without hormones, yet there are countless endocrine disruptors loose in the environment. How do they affect our health? Today, we're talking about the hidden hormone epidemic and how to navigate it.
Our guest is Dr. Aviva Ram. She is a family physician with specialties in integrative gynecology, obstetrics, and pediatrics with a focus on women's endocrinology. Dr. Ram is also a midwife and herbalist. She's the author of several books, including the textbook Botanical Medicines for Women's Health and The Adrenal Thyroid Revolution. She's been bridging traditional medicine, total health ecology, and good science for over 3 decades. Dr. Ram's latest book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Aviva Ram.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you both today.
We're very excited about having you with us. Dr. Ram, you've had an intriguing background. You are a midwife, an herbalist, and a board-certified family physician who trained at Yale. You have special expertise in obstetrics, gynecology, pediatrics, and integrative medicine, something our listeners are very interested in as well. How in the world did you put all of that together?
You know, it's a great question. It's a little bit like the two of you in combination, right? You bring this sense of humanities, this sense of seeing things culturally and socially with medical anthropology, and you bring the scientific medical piece with it in terms of the pharmacology. And in a sense, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at my patients. I'm looking at healthcare, both on the individual lens and also in the cultural lens and politically through a lot of different worldviews. So more specifically, my journey was really interesting in that I started out wanting to be a physician, getting exposed to things like food politics and environmental science and thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something different than just more medications to address these complex issues that people are facing. And that took me down kind of a road less traveled, because when I got interested in it in 1981, there wasn't anything called integrative or alternative medicine. It didn't have a name. There were just a few books. There was no big institute, in the National Institutes of Health. It just didn't exist. So I went the old school route and apprenticed with midwives and herbalists. But I still wanted to put that scientific foundation under it. And I wanted to also be able to change the way conventional medicine is seen and practiced. So then that meant taking all that kind of alternative perspective and putting the MD behind it. And that's how I ended up going to Yale. And I think just in terms of our cultural shift toward a lot of folks now wanting things more holistic, wanting more than just a pill for every ill or a surgery for every symptom, the timing was right for me to be in this place where I could bring all of these different pieces and create what I call a new medicine, because it's not just about going to your doctor anymore. A lot of people, they get the flu and they go to their doctor, but then they go to their naturopath for some supplements, and then they go to their massage therapist for the aches, right? It's not just about going and getting that Z-Pack for the infection or the flu shot anymore, or Tamiflu. People want more. So that's what I do, is I bring the whole perspective and the whole person into the picture.
Well, I'll bet your patients really appreciate not having to go to all those different professionals who each offer one tiny piece of it when you can offer the entire package. We're talking to you today about hormones, and that's something that I think a lot of people are confused about. When we talk about hormones, I think most people think of sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone. There are tons of other hormones in the human body as well. Let me ask you about the hidden hormone epidemic you've written about.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many hormones, and the beauty of our bodies when we do look at health through this different lens is that we know that everything is interconnected. So our stress and our stress hormones like cortisol, our thyroid hormones, our blood sugar hormones like insulin do affect those other hormones as well. The hidden hormone epidemic refers to the fact that, one, there are a lot of folks, particularly women out there, struggling with gynecologic and hormonal symptoms that are not being recognized. And they're doing so in truly epic numbers that have never existed before. 1 in 6 women will now go in for a fertility consultation. 1 in 8 women has a complex condition called polycystic ovary syndrome, which has to do with blood sugar hormones and sex hormones. 1 in 10 women has a complex immune and hormonal condition called endometriosis. And 30% of women over 50 will end up with a hysterectomy, usually for a benign condition that's also hormonally driven called uterine fibroids. So there are a lot of women struggling, and that's part of why it's hidden. But also a lot of women, when we do have these symptoms, we may just assume it's normal for being a woman, so it stays hidden because we don't talk about it. Or when we do go to our medical doctor may say, oh, well, that's normal. You're a woman, of course, or it's just stress. And so it kind of still stays hidden. The diagnoses don't get discovered. For example, it takes on average, and this is really an astonishing, staggering fact if you think about it, 9 years on average for a woman with endometriosis to get a diagnosis, going from doctor to doctor to doctor, often with significant enough pain to be prescribed opioid medications for her pain without a diagnosis of endometriosis. It's often not until a woman is struggling with fertility in her 30s, for example, that someone says, oh, let's see what's going on here, and does laparoscopic exploration and says, oh, you've had endometriosis. You've probably had it for the last 15 years. So that's, a whole big perspective on why there's this hidden hormone epidemic.
One other question I have about the hidden hormone epidemic. We have talked on the People's Pharmacy about hormone disruptors that are entering our environment and presumably from the environment then entering our bodies. Do you think that's playing a role in this epidemic of hormone problems?
I actually think it's the single biggest factor that is playing a role. We know Rachel Carson tried to warn us in the 60s that these environmental chemicals that at that time numbered in the hundreds or thousands, which we now have at least 80,000 chemicals circulating in our environment that come from agriculture, industry, and pharmacy, were creating problems for human health. She saw it happening. She was largely dismissed at the time, but now it's really unequivocal. These hormone disruptors or endocrine disruptors mimic our own hormones. They turn on pathways, genes, processes that were not meant to be turned on as robustly sometimes as they are, like contributing to excess estrogen burden in our body. Sometimes they turn off pathways that are very important for our health, like disrupting hormone function, thyroid function. But truly, I think it is the biggest and most insidious factor that we're all facing. And we didn't experience, our grandmothers were not exposed to these, right? It was really not until the Better Living Through chemistry in the 1950s that these chemicals were really even introduced in significant numbers. And prior to that, at the turn of the previous century, they didn't even exist. And so it really explains this increased exposure that we've had is directly parallel and consistent with the increase in increase in hormonal problems that women are experiencing. And it's not just women, it's men too. I mean, we know that sperm motility, sperm count, fertility rates in men have been majorly impacted by, for example, these endocrine disruptors that act as estrogens. We know that even some developmental anomalies that we've seen in much higher rates, still rare, but much, much higher rates than were ever seen before in infant boys' urinary and genital tracts are a result of these endocrine disruptors we're exposed to.
Dr. Ram, I'm fascinated that you mentioned thyroid because hypothyroidism is incredibly common. The number one most prescribed drug in the country these days seems to be levothyroxine or Synthroid. What do you think is causing so much hypothyroidism? And there's also a fair amount of hyperthyroidism.
There is, and you're correct about that being the most prescribed pharmaceutical. I think back to the endocrine disruptors, we know that an enormous number of environmental exposures we get, sometimes seemingly simple things like fluoridated water. And I'm not saying people shouldn't use fluoride necessarily in their water, but that's a whole other conversation, a longer conversation. But even simple things like that, or the bromides that are in bread, leavening just kind of standard bread, pizza dough, things like that, can impact our thyroid function. But we also know that stress, interestingly, high cortisol can have a significant impact, slowing down thyroid function. So we want to, again, look to the environment, and we want to remember that stress is actually considered an environmental toxin that we want to address.
You're listening to Dr. Aviva Ram, an internal medicine and family physician with specialties in integrative gynecology, obstetrics, and pediatrics. Her focus is women's endocrinology. Dr. Ram is also a midwife and herbalist. She's the author of several books, including Botanical Medicines for Women's Health and The Adrenal Thyroid Revolution. Her latest book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
After the break, we'll talk more about menopause and hormones.
How do hormone fluctuations affect migraine headaches?
When are hormones appropriate to treat the hot flashes during menopause? What other options might there be?
Stress can make menopausal symptoms worse. What natural ways do women have to reduce stress in their lives?
Which herbs can be helpful during menopause?
Many women find that vaginal dryness is just as big a problem as hot flashes. How can that be treated appropriately?
We'll also find out what an integrative physician does to make sure the adrenal glands and their hormones are working well.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's KAYA Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
Also by CocoVia, now offering its cardio health product with 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
We're talking about women's health and calming hormone chaos to achieve well-being.
Our guest today is Dr. Aviva Ram. Dr. Ram is board certified in family medicine, and she's also a midwife and an herbalist. Her most recent book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
Dr. Ram, in Hormone Intelligence, you also discuss a number of other conditions that people may not associate with hormones. For example, migraine headaches. What's the connection?
For women, when we experience rapid declines in estrogen, which happen premenstrually, happen postpartum, and happen in perimenopause and menopause, there is a connection between that estrogen and some of the neurotransmitters or brain chemicals that can lead to migraines. And so these big hormonal transitions are really common times for women to develop hormonal migraines.
Dr. Ram, I'd also like to talk a bit about menopause. I remember, because we've been doing this for a while, when Premarin was like the number one most prescribed drug in America. And then Prempro, which was partially Premarin and partially a synthetic progesterone, was also the number one most prescribed drug. And then the pendulum swung from one extreme to the other, so that now physicians are very careful, very cautious, and very reluctant in many cases to prescribe female hormones to women who are having night sweats. So what do you do when someone comes in and says, Dr. Ram, I'm having these incredible night sweats. They're waking me up. I'm just miserable. What's the opportunity there for a different way of dealing with this problem? Or is estrogen and progesterone still appropriate?
Well, the answer is yes and yes. So the swing in the pendulum really had to do with the women's health studies, which showed that we were overestimating the benefits of hormone therapy for every woman and underestimating the risks. And so when we take a healthy calculation of the risks, and we know that women shouldn't be on them forever, we don't want to lean into high doses. We want to make sure that if a woman doesn't have a uterus, she's getting the right dose of estrogen or progesterone. If she does have a uterus, the right doses of estrogen and progesterone, what her individual risk factors are. And we want to use those hormones for things that they are indicated for. Hot flashes and night sweats and vaginal dryness being amongst those that some estrogen and progesterone can help with. Sleep being another one that progesterone can help with. But I always try to lean into natural supplements first. Botanicals, sleep support if hot flashes are waking her up, dietary changes. For example, simply alcohol, red wine is a huge contributor to sleep problems and hot flashes in women. We know that stress can actually trigger and exacerbate hot flashes and also affect sleep. So things that we can do naturally are always, in my opinion, the safest and best go-to. And then when we do need to up level or, take a next step, escalate to pharmaceuticals, doing it with a full sense of these aren't just something to give out like candy. We need to give the right dose, make sure we're getting the right formula for that person, and then keep an eye on, not just, put someone on hormone replacement and say, see it in 15 years, say, let's check, let's lower the dose in 6 months, see if those symptoms are still bothering you, see if you even still need this anymore, and always going for the lowest dose possible. And then formulations are important too, right? You can use, if a woman has vaginal dryness, you can use a transvaginal topical estrogen rather than an oral. So you're actually mitigating some of the potential risks. So there are ways that we can use these things as well.
I'm assuming that a transvaginal topical estrogen would be in a lower dose than you would need to take as a pill. Is that correct?
It's a lower dose, and also you avoid something called first pass liver metabolism. So you're not getting as much absorbed systemically, and it's not breaking down into what are called metabolites that may actually have slightly more toxic impact and thereby be those compounds that put us at greater risk for breast cancer or endometrial cancer, some of the risks that come with taking that estrogen for too long. And you get just as great efficacy for something like vaginal dryness.
Dr. Ram, something just jumped out at me from what you said. You suggested that stress can make menopausal symptoms worse. And I'm thinking, what menopausal woman isn't under a lot of stress?
It's so
because
true.
the way our lives are set up, frequently women are hitting menopause right about the time that their care obligations for their families are going in two different directions and really pulling them in two different directions, caring for their parents and caring for their adolescent offspring, perhaps. Not always, but, it's not uncommon. And the state of a woman's career at menopause may be in a critical situation where she feels that she needs to be putting in ever more effort into the career, which of course increases the stress. So the question is, are there natural ways to control stress? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's all the points you bring up are so important, in addition to the cultural stigma about being, I'm doing air quotes here, older, right? The invisibility of women as we get into our 50s.
Or even menopausal. Women don't want to admit to those really uncomfortable hot flashes.
Yeah. So there are so many things we can do to mitigate stress. And as facile and basic as it sounds, meditation is probably one of the best that we can do. We know unequivocally that it helps to establish healthier cortisol levels. It helps us sleep better. It actually improves cognitive function, which a lot of women report, particularly as their estrogen goes down. They feel like they're having a little brain fog is a way that a lot of women describe it to me. Where did I put my keys? I just had them phenomenon. And also something called paced breathing can actually help reduce hot flashes. And one of the big things that is part of meditation isn't just sitting on a cushion. In fact, you don't have to sit on a cushion at all, but it's the breathing. It's that deep breathing that really helps to bring that full reset. And I'm not someone who likes to sit still for, an hour on a cushion. So you can do meditation while you're walking. You can put on some music and dance. You can do anything that brings you into a state of mind where your troubles are melting away and you're just a little bit more calm and relaxed. The other thing is, you talk about all of these competing factors that are pulling women in a million directions externally and internally. And as women, we're so primed to take care of everyone else that we often do forget to put ourselves on the back burner. And I think as we hit that age of menopause, if we haven't already believed that we've earned it, we've definitely earned some selfish time, right? And even if it's not really, to me, self-care is not selfish, but it's okay to say, I need to be a little selfish right now. I need to be a little self-oriented and do some things to support myself. Another thing to remember is that often when we're on the go all the time, we're busy all the time, we're not eating as well. So getting a multivitamin every day and making sure to get some vitamin D, which also takes care of your immune system, but helps with mood, and some magnesium for mood and mind and calm, really important. And then I personally love a category of botanicals, herbs called adaptogens. And a few of them, like holy basil, ashwagandha, reishi mushroom, are very gentle and help to support the nervous system, help to bring calm. Ashwagandha and reishi mushroom can even be used to help support good sleep. And so those can be used as a daily support supplement. And then, of course, good sleep, right? That's one of the most important things we can do for ourselves when we are stressed, is give ourselves that time to sleep. And I know I said it earlier, but the alcohol. I know it sounds so relaxing and in the moment can feel so relaxing to have that glass of wine or something that you enjoy. But most women I know, particularly when we hit menopausal age, wine and alcohol just tend to disrupt sleep. We know that they disrupt the circadian rhythm, but a lot of women also feel more blue and down when they've had it. So find mocktails and other things that you enjoy and stay away from the alcohol as much as you can.
Dr. Ram, I'd like to follow up a bit on those herbs and natural approaches for things like the symptoms of menopause. So in addition to the herbs that you've mentioned for stress, is there anything for hormonal balance that doesn't require, a drug like Prempro?
Absolutely. So my favorite is an herb called Vitex or chasteberry. And we tend to think of it, if you've heard of it before, as something for menstrual health. But over the past number of years, studies have come out that specifically show that it supports healthy estrogen levels, supports healthy progesterone levels, but it doesn't have any hormones in it. It triggers our own brain and ovaries to produce these, which is really important to kind of extend your perimenopausal life before you hit menopause, but even if you're in menopause, to keep supporting the production of some of these hormones naturally. And specifically, it has been shown to improve mood, to improve sleep, to help with vaginal dryness, and with hot flashes. So a win all around. A combination of valerian and lemon balm has been shown to help with sleep and hot flashes. And good old melatonin is wonderful, not just for sleep, but also for helping to reset the circadian rhythm and also for reducing inflammation and supporting brain and ovarian health as we get older. All really important. So those are some of my favorite go-tos.
What kind of a dose are we talking about for melatonin?
For melatonin, I like to start low, like 0.5 milligrams, and then go to a max of 5 milligrams. But I usually recommend starting with, 0.3 or 0.5 milligrams, seeing how that does for a few days, because you should notice effects within a few days. And if then you're still not seeing it, go up to 1 milligram, stick with that for a few days, and then incrementally go up as needed, because the dose is different for every individual, and more is not necessarily better. It's once you find that best low dose for yourself, that's the dose. And the other thing is, don't take it right before bed. Take it about an hour to 30 minutes before you go to bed to allow it to start to do its work.
Dr. Ram, we've heard from a lot of women with vaginal dryness due to menopause that they use olive oil or coconut oil topically. What do you think of that?
I think that they can be fine if they're working for you. I find that the coconut oil can be a little bit drying actually for women. So it's not my first go-to. I actually recommend products that have hyaluronic acid increasingly these days because women get good results from them. They don't seem to change the vaginal pH significantly. And also the studies do support the benefits of supporting that health of the vaginal tissue. So I do include products, and I've used formulations that you can DIY with coconut oil and olive oil. I'm not against them, but again, increasingly I'm moving in this other direction. I think it works really well.
What sorts of products are these?
I mean, should I say names?
Sure.
There are several on the market. Replens is an example of one that I have seen good results with. And I feel like the data, not behind that product particularly, but behind the ingredients is really strong.
Dr. Ram, I'd like to ask about a different area.
Of the body?
Of the body, yes. And well, it's pretty close, as a matter of fact, anatomically. But it's something that I think many of your colleagues just don't think about very much until something really, really bad goes wrong. And that's the adrenal glands.
Yeah.
And we just take them for granted in the United States for the most part. And yet there are a lot of things that can affect the adrenals, including a very common class of medications called corticosteroids. So a lot of people are on prednisone. A lot of people are taking inhaled steroids for either their asthma or for their allergies. Tell us a little bit about the adrenals. Is there such a thing as adrenal fatigue? And what does an integrative physician do about the adrenal glands?
So the adrenals are two tiny little glands. They're shaped like triangles and they're yellow and fatty, and they sit one on top of each kidney. And they have many jobs. They regulate inflammation. They regulate your body's fluid balance. There's something called aldosterone. When we talk about the adrenals from a sort of integrative or functional perspective, what we're talking about is the fact that they are so intimately involved in stress, fatigue, inflammation, and immunity. And that is mediated through a hormone called cortisol and a neurotransmitter called adrenaline. Most people have probably heard of both of these. And what happens is our bodies are meant to react and respond to stress in a way that the adrenals get activated to produce adrenaline and cortisol, but then the stress is supposed to pass. If you imagine gazelles at a watering hole in a nature show and the lions are creeping up to, because they're hungry, and the gazelle's ears prick up and their nostrils flare out and they look up and they look around and then they run. That's the influence of adrenaline. And then the influence of cortisol sends blood sugar to their muscles to fuel their running. It makes them go into a very intuitive rather than sort of cognitively focused mode. They're just really reacting and getting away from danger as fast as they can. But what happens is the lions catch either the sickest lion, the gazelle, or the oldest gazelle, and they go about their business of eating their dinner, and the gazelles go right back to the watering hole. They calm down, and this all happens in a matter of 15 minutes. For us, we're living under this kind of fight or flight most of the time. We get little breaks from it, maybe if we're watching a relaxing, something on Netflix, or we get a walk in nature. But for the most part, we're going from our social media to our to-do list, to our bills that we have to pay, to something stressful we're watching on Netflix, to the crisis in our life, to the constant crises that we're now facing in the world. So we're living under this constant influence of adrenaline, which can make us feel very anxious, but it can also do things like raise our blood pressure, raise our heart rate, affect our sleep. And cortisol, which when we have too much of it, is called the wear and tear hormone in medicine. That's what we call it. It affects your muscle. It affects your bones. It affects your cognitive function. It can affect your immune system negatively, even leading to autoimmune conditions. So what people talk about when they talk about adrenal fatigue, which is not a recognized medical phenomenon, there's no diagnosis called adrenal fatigue. But what people are talking about is what happens when we've been living under that influence for too long, and now we're spent, we're exhausted. And what's happening is the adrenals aren't pooping out. The brain is saying, okay, we can't keep producing these hormones all the time. And so that's what we're talking about. And again, back to those adaptogens, those are the key herbs for adrenal support. And then vitamin B complex and magnesium, really important for adrenal support. And stress reduction.
You're listening to Dr. Aviva Ram. She's a midwife, an herbalist, and an integrative medicine doctor specializing in internal medicine and women's health. Her most recent book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
After the break, women sometimes complain that doctors don't take their symptoms seriously. Is that true?
We'll discuss options for contraception. Are there non-hormonal approaches that are effective without serious side effects?
We'll also find out how women can change their habits to help their hormones throughout the lifespan.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia, now offering its new cardio health product with 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols. This 100% pure Coco Pro cocoa extract formulation is backed by 20-plus years of research on cocoflavanols.
Cocoflavanols increase the body's output of nitric oxide to improve endothelial function, which results in enhanced blood vessel flexibility and better blood flow. More information at cocovia.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, now offering its cardio health product with 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany, KAYA Biotics.com.
You've heard of the microbiome and how important it is for digestive health. What about hormone health? Do our gut microbes have an impact on hormonal balance? What should we be eating to enhance the gut-hormone connection? One complaint that many women have is low libido. Are there ways to improve sexual desire and satisfaction?
We're talking with Dr. Aviva Ram. She is a family physician with specialties in integrative gynecology, obstetrics, and pediatrics with a focus on women's endocrinology. Dr. Ram is also a midwife and an herbalist. She's been bridging traditional medicine, total health ecology, and good science for over 3 decades. Dr. Ram's latest book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
Dr. Ram, we hear that women say frequently their symptoms aren't taken seriously. Healthcare providers don't really pay as much attention to women's symptoms as they do to men's symptoms. And there may even be some research demonstrating that if a woman goes in with symptoms that might be a heart attack, she might not be worked up for it. Is that a realistic complaint? And if so, what can we do about it?
Sadly, it is true. Women's pain is dismissed. We wait in emergency departments and waiting rooms significantly more, sometimes double the time that our male counterparts do. And what you said about heart attacks is frighteningly accurate. Women are more likely to be sent home without a cardiac workup. Even in hospital, if a woman is reporting chest pain, she's more likely to be told she has anxiety and be given anxiety medication, and so have a heart attack completely missed. We have to learn to advocate for ourselves. First of all, we have to learn to believe that what we're experiencing in our bodies is real and not gaslight ourselves and say, oh, it must just be stress, or that doctor must be right. It must just be anxiety. No, if you're having chest pain, if you're more fatigued than you usually are, if you're having pelvic pain, anything that you have going on, keep saying it until someone believes you, and don't distrust yourself. And if you need to bring an advocate with you to a medical appointment, there are lots of ways to learn to advocate for yourself, but it's really important at any age that we learn to advocate for ourselves.
Dr. Ram, I'd like to talk a little bit about contraception. It seems as if there haven't been any major changes in decades, like male contraception. I mean, where's the male pill? And what should women be considering? Because it seems like there just aren't a lot of new options.
There aren't a lot of new options. And we know that in studies that have looked at giving men hormonal contraception, they don't like the side effects. So the studies always get canceled, which is always hilarious when you ask women, because we experience those hormonal symptoms for, our entire reproductive lives. So it's pretty funny. I think women have to know the risks and the options, much like when we were talking about hormone replacement therapy. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no right, there's no wrong. It's what works for you, what you have the time and the bandwidth for. Not, look, let's talk about teenagers. They're not going to check their basal body temperature every morning before they get up and put something in their chart. So for them, charting and doing fertility awareness methods may just not be realistic. And something like the pill may be a better option. So what's really important is to know what the options are, know what the pros and cons are, know what the risks and side effects are, not take something that you have that are high risk for. If you have a migraine with aura, then an estrogen-based hormonal contraceptive is contraindicated. But unfortunately, not all doctors remember to ask those questions. So we really have to do a little bit of our own homework and be educated consumers, but know what you're comfortable with. For a lot of women, an IUD is a great option. You kind of set it and forget it. You get 7 years out of the Mirena. You can get 10 years, 12 years out of a copper IUD. For some women, the pill may be exactly perfect. For some women, other options. And for some women, if they do love it, fertility awareness is great.
I am now wondering about how our diets affect our hormones. Since we're talking about hormones, does what we eat make any difference?
It absolutely does. So First of all, our hormones are made from building blocks that actually come from our food. So, for example, our sex hormones are made from fats. We have to have enough fat in our diet to produce hormones. We have to have nutrients like zinc, vitamin D, iodine to produce our sex hormones, to produce thyroid hormone, etc. So getting the nutrients that we need is fundamental to having healthy hormone levels. We also need to get enough of the nutrients that our body needs to naturally break down and eliminate or detoxify those hormones, a lot of which happens in our liver. And that requires compounds that come from sulfur-containing vegetables, the brassicaceae, the cauliflower, the broccoli, the kale, all those leafy greens, garlic, onions, compounds from things like blueberries and other berries are super important for that natural detoxification. And back to what we were talking about earlier with endocrine disruptors, it's not just what's in our diet per se, it's some of what's in our food that maybe naturally isn't meant to be in our food. So the herbicides and pesticides that make their way into our diet that act as endocrine disruptors, the plastic packaging or plastic water bottles that really do leach into our food and act as endocrine disruptors. So we want to think about what we're getting that we're supposed to be getting, what we might not be getting nutritionally that we really need, and what might be a tag along from from an environmental perspective that can affect our hormones.
Dr. Ram, I want to talk a little bit about something you just mentioned, and that was fat. It's highly controversial. You mentioned it was important for hormones, but which fats are good, which fats are bad? We've gone through a period of time where I think a lot of people, especially women, were told, low fat, no fat yogurt is the way to go. Be very careful about what dairy, go with either skim milk or low fat milk. And I suspect that tens of millions of women followed that advice for a very long time. I wonder if it was impacting their hormones.
Yeah, we've become really fat phobic in our culture. And it's not surprising considering the just massive volume of trans fats and unhealthy fats that have been so part of the American diet for a few decades now. So trans fats are not food. They're not healthful. They actually create enormous amounts of inflammation. So anything that is not a naturally sourced fat that, is not coming from some form of nut or seed or fish is a fat that I would avoid. Very important to get omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. And the primary source of those is good quality fish, wild caught fish. Those omega-3s are really important for our hormone health, just the building blocks that we need to produce hormones, but also to prevent and reduce inflammation. And then getting a healthful array of olive oil, avocado, and nuts and seeds in the diet is a great way to get the healthful fats that we need. You really don't have to do anything more than that. I mean, if you eat fatty fish, a low mercury fish like sardines or salmon 2-3 times a week. If you don't eat fish, you can take a fish oil or you can do an algae-based omega-3 supplement. And then you'll get those healthful omega-6s, but not too much of them if you include nuts and seeds, and like flaxseed in your diet is a great way. And then for cooking, olive oil is a great source.
Dr. Ram, I'm thinking about libido complaints. Can women regulate their libido by taking hormones, or are there supplements that can help with that?
Libido is a really complex issue. So when I work with a woman who has low libido, I really try to get under the hood on what's going on, because interestingly, hormone imbalances are one of the smallest contributors to low libido for women. So for women, there are a lot of changes, particularly that happen in perimenopause, but we know that even people in their 20s are having less sex than ever. Their libido's lower. And what is it? Studies have found using electronic devices. People are just too distracted from each other to create intimacy. And for women, especially in perimenopause, yes, absolutely. And menopause, vaginal dryness can cause a lot of discomfort. So if someone's having vaginal dryness, we can use some of the suppositories or topicals that we talked about, like the hyaluronic acid or other lubricants. We can do a topical vaginal estrogen that can help tremendously. Again, you can use the Vitex. But sometimes it's other things going on. It can be fatigue. It can be stress. It can be long-term relationships where your partner doesn't look like your partner looked when he or she was 20 or 30 anymore. Or maybe you don't look like you did when you were 20 or 30. Granted, most of us don't in our 50s and beyond. And so there can be other issues of self-consciousness, self-esteem that come up. So I want to look at the whole picture rather than just focusing in on botanicals or supplements or pharmaceuticals when I approach libido.
As a pharmacologist, of course, I am very interested in hormones like testosterone. It's been one of those hormones that the Food and Drug Administration has basically frowned upon, not just for women, but for men as well. It's like, well, if you really have hypogonadism and all the other symptoms that go along with that, then maybe you can get some testosterone, but don't take it for any other reason. You got to be diagnosed. And I'm just wondering what role testosterone has, because we've been told, well, it can cause heart attacks. It might cause cancer. It's scary for a lot of people. Is there a role for testosterone?
I think it's a great question. And I think it's a question a lot of us are still asking, including researchers. So we know, I think the biggest risk with testosterone is we know that it does increase cholesterol. And so I think we get concerned about prescribing something that can increase cholesterol, especially in an age bracket where that does become more of a problem. Or 50% of women over 50 are on 2 pharmaceuticals, and one of those is often a statin drug for cholesterol. So adding something to the mix that raises it becomes a little bit counterintuitive and counterproductive. The data on testosterone for women and libido and drive in general is still scant, but it does suggest that for some women with low libido, it may be an answer. So it's not the first go-to. It's something you would want to use in low dose and carefully. And then if you do use it, use it for a shorter period of time and then monitor cholesterol, of course, and liver function. So it's not a go-to for me in my practice, but it's something that women absolutely can consider.
Another topic that I'd like to ask you about briefly is the gut hormone connection. We think of our digestive tracts as doing digestion. We don't think of them as doing anything endocrine. Are they involved?
Isn't it so fascinating that our gut is connected to basically everything? Our mental health, our immune health, and yes, our hormonal health. So one of the big things that our gut does is it has this, I like to call it a department, but there's a whole collection of microorganisms in our gut microbiome called the estrobolome. They are genetically programmed to help us break down and appropriately eliminate and selectively reabsorb estrogen. So we're eliminating enough that we don't have excess estrogen, but we're reabsorbing enough to be efficiently reusing what we've produced, and also enough to keep our bones healthy, our heart healthy, and our brain healthy. So it plays a tremendous role in maintaining hormone health, especially estrogen. And also our gut is tremendously impacted by our hormones as well. So we know that our microbiome changes throughout our life. Our microbiome during pregnancy is different under the influence of the type of estrogen, estriol that we have more of in pregnancy than it is in the rest of our reproductive years when we're producing mostly estradiol, which is still different than when we're in menopause, when we're producing mostly estrone. So our actual gut makeup changes, which is part of why women in perimenopause and menopause sometimes experience more gas and bloating and digestive changes, constipation. We know premenstrually, under the influence of progesterone and inflammatory compounds called prostaglandins, that women often get more gas, bloating, and loose stools. So there's a bi-directional relationship that's profound between our gut health and our hormone balance.
Dr. Ram, we have heard some people are concerned about the possibility that young girls may be entering puberty at younger and younger ages. Why would that be?
It's true that girls are going into puberty on average several years before our grandmothers did, and even younger than we did. And it's so significant, for example, that the Kotex company has created a line of menstrual products just for girls who are around 8 years old with hearts and stars and things like that, just to make them more comfortable with. Toward the conversation of endocrine disruptors, that is the single biggest factor that is affecting our girls. They're getting exposed to estrogens from body products, herbicides and pesticides, drinking out of plastic water bottles, and they are absolutely turning on their puberty pathway earlier than it should be. And it puts them at all kinds of risks. So it's something that is so important for us to address as part of this hidden hormone epidemic.
Dr. Romm, there seems to be an epidemic of what has loosely been described as autoimmune diseases. Things like arthritis, things like lupus, things like thyroid problems, Hashimoto's disease. And so I'm just wondering this relationship between hormones and autoimmune diseases. What are the connections? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it is really astonishing, actually, when we think about it. I mean, most of us, when we were starting out in this work, 30 years ago, we didn't know that many people. Even in our practices, we didn't see that many patients with autoimmune conditions. And now I think all of us, even in the common, public, we all know somebody who has Hashimoto's or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. It's really quite common. And these conditions can be devastating. And the hormonal connection is quite profound. So much like those migraines, when women go through major hormonal shifts, again, those big plummets in estrogen, those are times that we do become more susceptible to autoimmune conditions. And a little known fact that is really important, you may know this as a pharmacologist, is that the pill, particularly the pill with estrogen or estrogen-containing medications, can actually be a trigger for certain autoimmune conditions. For example, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis can be set off or exacerbated by too much estrogen, interestingly. So there's absolutely a profound hormonal connection. And when we think about hormones in the bigger picture, back to cortisol, we know that when we've been living in that overdrive for too long and the brain says enough of this cortisol production and kind of puts the kibosh on the adrenals a little bit, that becomes a time when the immune system is not functioning the way it's meant to be functioning. And we also may become at more risk for autoimmune conditions. And I honestly, I can't tell you how many times in my practice I have had a patient come to me who says, I have no idea why I suddenly developed Hashimoto's, or I have no idea why I've suddenly developed rheumatoid arthritis. And then we look back over her life for the past year and she's gotten divorced, or her mother's been sick, or one of her children was going through a struggle, or she moved or changed jobs, or quite often 3 or 5 of those things were happening at once. And then now her body's paying the price later on.
Dr. Romm, there is something called PCOS. I wonder if you can tell us what that stands for and what, if anything, can be done about it.
It stands for polycystic ovary syndrome. And for most women, at least 70% and probably more, it's a complex metabolic, meaning it has to do with blood sugar and insulin, and hormonal condition. So it has to do with our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and insulin resistance particularly. And there are quite a number of things that we can do about it. One is particularly important is managing our blood sugar, really working to learn to eat in a way that creates optimal blood sugar balance and reducing insulin resistance. And so the standard American diet, for example, eating a lot of refined carbs, eating a lot of sugar, breeds insulin resistance. But also, so does not sleeping well, so does lack of exercise. So really all of the lifestyle things that we've talked about are critically important. And then in addition, there are some supplemental things we can do. For example, there is a supplement called inositol. It comes in several forms, myo-inositol, pino-inositol, and these inositols can be very helpful in restoring blood sugar balance and reducing insulin resistance. We also know that a diet that's higher in fish and healthful fruits and vegetables and lower in carbs, particularly refined carbs, and a diet that's very high in protein compared to carbs can be especially important for women with PCOS.
And now a giant question. Our time with you is almost up. What are the most important lifestyle changes that women can practice to benefit their hormones throughout their lives?
Getting good sleep is a number one. So committing to 7 hours of sleep a night is really essential. Getting some time in nature where you're also walking. So a daily walk or a few days a week where you're getting in some movement, some exercise, but that time in nature adds in that meditative, relaxing aspect to it. And then really committing to a diet that is based on healthy, whole foods, in a nourishing and non-restrictive way. I think if you can just focus on sleep, some movement out in nature, and a healthful diet, you're doing so much right there for your hormone balance.
Dr. Aviva Romm, thank you ever so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Aviva Romm, a family physician with specialties in integrative gynecology, obstetrics, and pediatrics, with a focus on women's endocrinology. She's the author of several books, including the textbook Botanical Medicines for Women's Health and The Adrenal Thyroid Revolution. She's been bridging traditional medicine, total health ecology, and good science for over 3 decades. Dr. Romm's latest book is Hormone Intelligence, the complete guide to calming hormone chaos and restoring your body's natural blueprint for well-being.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
And by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com/health-club.
Today's show is number 1266. You can find the podcast on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you go to peoplespharmacy.com, you can share your thoughts about today's show in the comments section of show 1266.
When we talked with Dr. Romm, she answered a few questions that we don't have time for right now. So we put them on the podcast. If you're interested in the connection between hormones and autoimmune diseases, you'll want to listen. We also discuss how hormones affect polycystic ovary syndrome and what women can do about it.
You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website on Monday morning. You might want to share it with a friend or family member.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to our newsletter, you'll also have regular access to our weekly podcast and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.